It was a quiet morning in a small town that seemed forgotten by time. The streets were dusty, and the wooden houses leaned a little from years of rain and wind. In one of those houses lived a young girl named Lena. She was barely 20 but carried the weight of someone twice her age. Every day she woke up before sunrise, tied her hair back, and walked down the road to the small diner where she worked. The place wasn't fancy, but it was all she had. Her life had never been easy. Her father had passed away when she was still a child, and her mother had fallen sick years later. Money was always tight. Some days they had just enough for food, and other days Lena went hungry so her mother could eat. But no matter how hard things got, Lena never complained. She had learned to smile through pain, to keep going when everything around her felt heavy. At the diner, she worked long hours, taking orders, washing dishes, wiping tables, sometimes until her hands went numb. The regular customers liked her because she always greeted them with warmth. No matter who walked in, rich or poor, she treated them all the same. That kindness was what made her stand out. One evening, near closing time, a man walked in who didn't look like the usual crowd. He was old, maybe in his 70s, and wore a plain gray coat and a simple hat. His face had deep wrinkles, but his eyes were sharp and calm. He walked with a cane and moved slowly, but there was something gentle about him. He sat in the corner booth and ordered a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. Lena served him with her usual polite smile and asked if he wanted anything to eat. He just shook his head and said softly, "Just coffee, thank you." He stayed for almost an hour, staring out the window as the rain began to fall. Before leaving, he placed a $20 bill on the table. The coffee had only cost $2. The next evening, he came again. Same booth, same coffee, same calm silence. After that, he became a regular. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he asked simple questions about the town, about the weather, about how her day was going. His voice was slow, almost soothing. At first, Lena didn't think much of it. She just thought he was a lonely old man with nowhere else to go. But after a few weeks, she began to look forward to his visits. There was something peaceful about him, like his presence made the air lighter. He never judged, never interrupted. He just listened. One evening, as she was wiping down the counter, he said quietly, "You remind me of someone I used to know." She looked up, curious. "Who's that?" He smiled faintly. "Someone who never gave up, no matter how hard life got." Lena laughed softly, not sure what to say. "Well, giving up isn't really an option for me." He nodded slowly. "That's what makes you different from most." From that day on, their conversations grew a little longer. He told her small stories about the past, about his travels, about the people he had met. He never talked about family, and she never asked. There was a quiet understanding between them. Months passed, and his visits became a part of her routine. Sometimes he would bring her small things, a book, a flower, or a pack of her favorite tea. She always refused at first, but he'd say, "It's just a gift, not a favor," and she'd accept it with a grateful smile. One night, after the diner had closed, he waited for her outside. The rain was heavy, and she was trying to fix her umbrella when he said, "Do you mind if I walk you home?" She hesitated for a second, then nodded. The streets were empty, and the sound of rain hitting the rooftops echoed around them. He walked beside her slowly, careful not to slip. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But my mother's here. And besides, where would I go? The world's too big for someone like me." He smiled a little sadly. "You never know. Sometimes life changes when we least expect it." When they reached her house, she thanked him and said goodnight. As she closed the door, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that something important had just begun, even if she didn't know what it was. A few days later, her mother's condition got worse. The doctor said she needed new medication that was too expensive. Lena tried everything, borrowing money, working extra hours, but it still wasn't enough. One night when the old man came for his usual coffee, she looked tired and worried. He noticed immediately. "You look like you haven't slept in days," he said gently. She forced a smile. "It's nothing, just a lot going on." He didn't press her, but the next day she found an envelope under the sugar jar at the counter. Inside was enough money to pay for her mother's medicine, and a note that said, "For someone who deserves better days." Her eyes filled with tears. She ran outside to find him, but he was gone. When he returned a few days later, she tried to give the money back, but he refused. "Don't see it as charity," he said. "See it as hope being passed forward." After that, Lena began to feel something she hadn't felt in years, gratitude mixed with warmth. She started to realize that this quiet, mysterious man had become a part of her life in ways she didn't expect. One evening after closing, he asked her to sit for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his tone serious. She sat down, nervous. "I don't have anyone," he said slowly. "No family, no one waiting for me at home. I've lived a long life and I've made mistakes. But there's one thing I still wish for, someone who cares. Not because of money or comfort, but because they have a heart." She stayed silent, unsure where he was going. Then he looked at her with calm, steady eyes and said words she never expected. "Would you consider being my companion? Maybe even my wife?" Lena froze. Her mind went blank. Marriage to him. It didn't make sense. He saw the shock on her face and said quickly, "I don't mean to surprise you. I'm not asking for love. I just want someone honest and kind around me for whatever time I have left. You don't have to answer now." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The words kept replaying in her head. On one hand, it sounded crazy. People would laugh, call her names. On the other, she thought about her mother, the bills, the endless struggle. But it wasn't just about money. There was something deeper. The man had shown her kindness when no one else had. She thought about his loneliness, the way he sat alone in the diner every evening. Maybe he just wanted someone to care, the way she wanted someone to believe in her. Days passed before she gave him her answer. When she finally did, it was quiet and simple. "If what you're asking for is honesty and companionship, then yes," she said softly. "I'll marry you." His eyes filled with emotion, though he tried to hide it behind a small smile. "Thank you, Lena," he said gently. "You'll never regret showing kindness." The wedding wasn't grand. It took place at a small courthouse with only a few witnesses. There were no fancy dresses, no flowers, no music. Just two people from different worlds standing side by side, trying to make sense of life's strange turns. When she moved into his house a few days later, she was surprised by how simple it was. The furniture was old but clean, the walls covered with old photos and books. It didn't look like a rich man's home. He lived humbly, like someone who had long stopped caring about luxury. That first night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the sound of the clock ticking and wondering if she had made the right choice. But when she looked at the old man sitting quietly in the next room, reading by the lamp's soft glow, she felt an unexpected peace. Maybe this was what fate had planned all along, two lonely souls who somehow found each other. She didn't know what the future would bring, but deep down she believed everything happens for a reason. Outside, the night was calm and the sound of crickets filled the air. Lena looked out the window and whispered to herself, "Maybe this is the start of something I don't understand yet." And she was right, and because just 1 week later, her entire world would change in ways she never imagined. When Lena married the old man, the whole town started talking. People whispered at the market, at the bus stop, even in front of the diner where she used to work. Some laughed and said she had done it for money. Others shook their heads, saying she must have lost her mind. She heard every word, but she pretended not to care. Deep down it hurt, but she reminded herself why she had said yes. It wasn't for the gossiping people or their opinions. It was for peace, for her mother's safety, and for the quiet kindness she had seen in the man's eyes. The first few days after the wedding were strange. The old man, now her husband, was polite and gentle, but also distant. He gave her space, never tried to control her, and spoke softly whenever they sat together. They shared meals in silence most of the time, yet the silence wasn't heavy. It was calm, almost comforting. He showed her around the house, a 2-story place on the edge of town. It looked small from the outside, but inside it was filled with old memories. The walls were covered with framed photos, faded letters, and books stacked high on wooden shelves. It wasn't fancy at all, just warm and full of history. There was one door, though, that he never opened. It was a dark wooden door at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor. The first time Lena asked about it, he said quietly, "That room is private, my dear. Please don't go in there," she nodded. She didn't want to push him. After all, everyone deserves their secrets. Every morning he woke up early and went into that locked room. She would hear the sound of paper rustling, drawers opening, sometimes even the faint click of what sounded like a safe. He would stay there for hours. Then he would come out calm as ever and join her for breakfast. Lena never asked again what he did in there. Instead, she focused on making the house feel alive. She cooked for him, cleaned, and opened the curtains to let in sunlight. The garden outside was dry and overgrown, so she spent her afternoons pulling weeds and planting flowers. Slowly, color returned to the house. One afternoon, while she was tending the roses, he came out with a tray of lemonade and 2 glasses. She smiled in surprise. "You didn't have to," she said. He chuckled softly. "You've been working all day. I thought you could use a drink." They sat on the porch sipping lemonade as the sun went down. The sky turned pink and the warm breeze carried the smell of fresh soil and flowers. "Do you like it here?" he asked after a while. She thought for a moment. "It's quiet, peaceful, I think I do." He nodded. "That's good. I haven't heard laughter or seen anyone in this garden for years. It's nice to see it alive again." It was the first time she saw him smile, not the polite kind, but a real smile that reached his eyes. It made her heart soften. For the first time, she didn't see him as just an old man. She saw someone who had lived a long life, maybe filled with both joy and loneliness. The days slowly turned into a week. Lena started to notice little things. The way he read the newspaper every morning but never turned on the television, how he always checked the mailbox himself, and how he kept a small black notebook that he carried everywhere. One night, while she was putting away the dishes, he came into the kitchen and stood quietly for a moment before saying, "Lena, do you feel trapped here?" She turned to him, surprised. "Trapped?" "No, of course not," he nodded slowly. "I just wanted to be sure. I know people are talking about us." "I hear it too," she smiled faintly. "Let them talk. I'm used to it." He gave her a look filled with quiet admiration. "You're stronger than most people I've met." His words warmed her heart. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened in just a few weeks, how her life had changed so quickly. She still didn't fully understand what the old man saw in her, but she was starting to feel that maybe, just maybe, this strange marriage had a purpose she hadn't discovered yet. The next morning, something unexpected happened. He called her into the living room and handed her a small box. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he said softly. Inside was an old silver locket. It looked worn but carefully kept. Inside the locket was a tiny photo of a young woman. She looked kind and graceful. "She was my wife," he said quietly. "She passed away many years ago." Lena's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. "You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in the way you carry yourself." She had the same gentleness. Lena didn't know what to say. She just closed the box gently and handed it back, but he shook his head. "Keep it. Maybe it will bring you luck." She held it in her hands, feeling the weight of history it carried. That small gesture made her realize that little by little, he was beginning to trust her. The following days were calm, almost peaceful. They developed a rhythm. She would cook breakfast, he would read the paper, they'd share tea in the garden, and in the evenings, he would tell her short stories from his younger days. He had a quiet sense of humor that caught her by surprise sometimes, but one thing never changed: the locked room. He went in and out every morning without a word, always locking it behind him. One afternoon she heard him inside talking to someone, but when she leaned closer, she realized he was just speaking on the phone. His tone was serious, and she caught only a few words: documents, account, and final arrangements. It made her curious, but she didn't ask. She didn't want to break the fragile trust they had built. Then one day he left early in the morning without telling her where he was going. He came back in the evening looking tired but content. When she asked if everything was okay, he just smiled and said, "Yes, everything's fine. Just taking care of some old business." That night at dinner, she noticed he was unusually quiet. He kept staring at her as if trying to memorize her face. Finally, he said softly, "Do you ever regret saying yes to me?" She looked up, confused. "No, why would I?" He smiled faintly. "Because you could have chosen someone your own age. Someone with more life ahead of them." She laughed a little. "You make it sound like I made a mistake. Maybe I just saw something people didn't." He nodded slowly, almost touched by her words. "You have no idea how much that means to me." For the first time, he reached across the table and placed his hand gently on hers. His skin was wrinkled and warm, and his touch carried something that felt like gratitude. That moment stayed in her heart. It wasn't love in the way most people imagine it. It was deeper, more like a connection between two souls who had both known struggle in different forms. A few days later, she went into town to buy groceries. As soon as she entered the store, she could feel the eyes on her. Two women whispered loudly near the fruit section. She married him for money, one said. He's old enough to be her grandfather. Lena's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. She finished shopping quickly and walked home, holding back tears. When she reached the house, she found the old man sitting on the porch reading. He looked up and immediately noticed her face. "What happened?" he asked gently. "Nothing," she said, forcing a smile. "Just people talking again." He nodded knowingly. "Let them talk. They don't know the truth." She sat beside him quietly, watching the sky turn orange as the sun began to set. The air smelled of grass and flowers. After a while, he said softly, "One day they'll understand. Maybe not now, but they will." His voice had a strange weight to it, almost as if he knew something she didn't. That night, as she prepared for bed, she saw him standing by the window, staring out at the stars. She walked up beside him and said, "You look like you're thinking about something important." He smiled without turning. "I am. Life moves fast, Lena. Sometimes we forget to tell people how much they mean to us." She felt her heart tighten. "Then tell me," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes kind and full of warmth. "You've brought life back into this old house. I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm glad you're here." Lena didn't know how to reply. She simply nodded, holding back tears. She had no idea what was coming, but she could feel something was changing. Something big, and she was right. Because one morning, just a week after their wedding, she woke up to find him gone. The bed was empty, his cane missing, and the house silent. On the dining table was a note, one that would change her life forever. The morning felt strange from the moment Lena opened her eyes. The house was too quiet. Normally, she could hear the sound of his cane tapping on the floor, or the soft creak of the study door upstairs. But that morning there was nothing. She called out softly, thinking maybe he was in the garden, but no one answered. She walked through each room, checking the kitchen, the porch, even the back shed. His shoes were gone, his hat missing, and the car wasn't in the driveway. That's when she noticed the folded note on the dining table. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. His handwriting was neat and calm, just like him. It said, "Lena, if you're reading this, don't be afraid. I had to leave for a while to take care of something important. You'll find the key to the locked room under the flower pot on the windowsill. Go there when you're ready. Everything you need to know is inside." Her heart started to race. For weeks that locked room had been a mystery, the one place he never let her enter. And now, suddenly, he wanted her to. She lifted the flower pot with shaking hands and found a small brass key taped underneath. For a long moment, she just stood there staring at it. Part of her wanted to wait for him to return, but something deep inside whispered that this was meant to happen now. She climbed the stairs slowly, the old wood creaking under her feet. The hallway was dim and dust floated in the morning light. When she reached the door, she hesitated. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. Then, with a deep breath, she turned the key. The door clicked open. The smell of old paper and wood filled the air. The room was nothing like she imagined. It wasn't dark or secretive, and it was full of light and memory. There were shelves packed with books and old files, a large wooden desk by the window, and several framed pictures on the walls. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning everything. On the desk lay a stack of documents neatly arranged, a few letters, and a single envelope with her name written in bold, careful handwriting. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and a small metal key attached to the corner. The letter began simply, "My dear Lena, if you're reading this, then I am either away or too weak to speak in person. There is something about me that you deserve to know. You married me not for wealth or gain, but out of kindness, something the world rarely gives anymore. And that kindness, my dear, has changed my life." Her eyes filled with tears as she continued reading. "You see, I was not always the quiet old man sitting in a diner. Many years ago, I owned several companies. I worked day and night, chasing money and success. People called me a millionaire, but deep down I was empty. My wife passed away early, and I was left with more riches than I could ever use, but no one to share them with. Over the years, I helped people, secretly, quietly, but the ones closest to me only saw me as a wallet. They lied, cheated, and left once they got what they wanted. Lena could almost hear his voice in her mind as she read. When I met you, Lena, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. You didn't care about who I was or what I had. You treated me like a human being, not a name or a number. That is why I asked you to marry me. I wanted to believe there were still good people left in this world. I wanted to trust again. Her tears fell freely now. She sat in the chair by the desk, clutching the paper close to her chest. The room you're sitting in holds my life story. The good and the bad. The folders on the desk contain information about my past businesses, investments, and charities. The key attached to this letter will open the small safe beneath the desk. Inside, you'll find documents that will explain what I have left for you. But before you look, I want you to promise one thing, that you will never lose the goodness in your heart no matter what you find inside. Lena wiped her face with her sleeve, her heart pounding faster. She knelt down and opened the drawer beneath the desk. There it was, a small black safe. Her fingers shook as she used the key to unlock it. Inside was a pile of papers and a single sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only by Lena." She opened it carefully. Inside were several property documents, a bank statement, and another note. The words written there made her breath catch. The house, the land, and the savings in my account are now under your name. There's also a foundation fund that I've set up for you. Not to make you rich, but to help those who live the kind of life you once lived. Help them find hope the way you helped me. She couldn't believe what she was reading. Her hands covered her mouth as she whispered, "This can't be real." But it was. The documents were official, stamped, and signed. He had transferred everything to her quietly, without ever mentioning it. She sat there for hours reading every word, her emotions swinging between disbelief and gratitude. She realized now that every little thing he had done, the locked room, the quiet phone calls, the talk about final arrangements, had been part of this plan. He had been preparing everything for her, making sure she would be taken care of when he was gone. By evening, Lena finally left the room, her eyes red from crying. She sat on the porch and watched the sun sink behind the trees. The house felt different now, heavier but also filled with meaning. She held the letter in her lap, reading it again under the fading light. She wondered where he was. Was he safe? Would he come back? Or was this his way of saying goodbye? The next morning, she decided to visit the diner, the place where it had all begun. The same waitress she used to work with was behind the counter. When she saw Lena, her eyes widened in surprise. "Well, look who it is," she said with a smirk. "The rich man's wife." Lena smiled faintly. "He's not rich," she said softly. "Just kind." The waitress shrugged. "If you say so." Lena sat in the booth where he used to sit, ordered a cup of black coffee, and looked out the window just like he always did. She tried to picture him sitting there again with his quiet smile and calm eyes. For a moment, she almost felt like he was still there, watching her with that same gentle pride. When she returned home, she placed the letter in a small wooden box beside her bed. She couldn't bring herself to touch the money or documents. Not yet, it didn't feel right. Days passed. There was still no word from him. Every morning she hoped to hear the sound of his cane or see his car in the driveway, but it never happened. Still, she didn't give up hope. One evening, as she watered the garden, a black car stopped in front of the gate. A man in a suit stepped out holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Lena?" he asked politely. "Yes," she said nervously. He handed her a folder. "I work for Mr. Howard. He asked me to deliver this personally." Her heart leapt. "Is he all right?" The man gave a small, sympathetic smile. "He's under medical care, but he wanted you to have this immediately." She took the folder, her hands trembling. Inside were more papers, legal documents confirming everything written in the letter. The man bowed slightly and left without another word. That night, Lena sat on the porch staring up at the stars. The air was cool, and the crickets sang softly in the distance. She opened the letter once more and read the last paragraph she hadn't noticed before. "If one day I don't return, don't grieve too long. Instead, live. Use what I've left behind to bring light to others. That's how you'll keep me alive, not through sadness, but through kindness." Lena pressed the paper to her heart and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than fear, a sense of purpose. The next morning, she woke up early, cleaned the house, and went back into the study. She organized his papers, made copies of the documents, and started learning about the foundation he had mentioned. It was all set up, waiting for her to take charge. She didn't know how to manage money or run a charity, but she knew what it meant to struggle. She knew how it felt to have nothing, and maybe that was enough. In the weeks that followed, Lena began writing letters to local shelters and community centers, offering small donations and help. She didn't tell them where the money came from. She just said it was from a friend who believed in kindness. Each time she gave, she felt closer to him, as if his spirit was guiding her, watching proudly from afar. But deep inside, she still hoped that one day, she'd see him again, sitting in that same corner of the diner, smiling over a cup of black coffee. And little did she know that hope wasn't in vain, because soon she would get the surprise of her life. Lena sat on the edge of the bed with the letter trembling in her hands. Her heart was beating fast, not because of fear anymore, but because of the weight of everything she had just discovered. She looked around the study again. It was like a secret world, filled with things that didn't match the quiet man she thought she had married. The smell of old books, the faint sound of a ticking clock, and the golden sunlight falling on the desk, all of it felt like the beginning of a truth she wasn't ready for. She took a deep breath and continued reading the letter. The words were written in careful handwriting, a little shaky, as if his hands had trembled when he wrote them. He began the letter by thanking her, for her kindness, for her honesty, and for not asking him questions when she easily could have. He said that she reminded him of someone he once knew, someone who had believed in people when no one else did. Lena read on, her eyes filling with tears as she learned about his past. Years ago, Mr. Howard had been a well-known businessman. He had built his company from nothing, starting as a delivery boy and slowly working his way up. People respected him, but many also envied him. Over the years, he had trusted the wrong people. Business partners who had stolen from him, family members who had disappeared the moment they got what they wanted. One line in the letter stood out to her. It said, "I stopped believing that anyone could care for me without wanting something in return. Then I met you." Lena's throat tightened as she read that line again and again. She thought back to all the nights he had sat quietly in the diner, watching people, never judging, never talking much. She realized now that he had been searching for something too, maybe a glimpse of hope that kindness still existed in the world. The letter continued, explaining how he had noticed her long before she realized it. He had seen how she worked long hours and still smiled at every customer, how she took leftovers home not for herself, but for her sick mother, and how she refused to let life make her bitter. That was why he had started visiting the diner. He wrote, "I didn't come for the coffee. I came to see if what I saw in you was real." Lena wiped her tears and kept reading. The letter went on to explain that his fortune had been hidden for years. He didn't want the world to know who he was anymore. He had sold most of his business, donated quietly to charities, and moved away from the city to live simply. He had watched too many people ruin themselves chasing money, so he decided to live in peace until he met her. There was also a note about the house, the properties, and a small organization he had started years ago to help poor children go to school. It was now in her name. He had left it all to her, but with one condition: she couldn't use it only for herself. She had to use a part of it to help others, the same way she had always tried to help with what little she had. At the end of the letter, he had written, "Lena, I didn't marry you because I needed someone to take care of me. I married you because you reminded me that life still has goodness in it. What you do with what I've left behind is up to you now. Just don't forget why I chose you." Lena sat still for a long time after finishing the letter. Her hands rested on her lap, and her eyes stared at the empty space in front of her. Everything around her felt heavy with meaning. She thought of the days when she had felt embarrassed about marrying him, the way people had whispered cruel things about her, and how she had convinced herself that she was doing the right thing just to keep her mother alive. Now, she realized she had been part of something far greater. As the day went on, she began exploring more of the study. She found journals, old business cards, letters from people he had helped, and even photographs of orphanages he had secretly funded. There were boxes of receipts showing donations made under false names. He had done so much good in silence, never wanting recognition. One photograph caught her eye. It was a picture of him standing with a group of children, all smiling. On the back of it, there was a small note written in his handwriting. "They never knew it was me, and that's how I wanted it." Lena pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. She felt something shift inside her, a deep sense of purpose that she couldn't explain. She wasn't rich yet, but she already felt wealthier than ever before. Not because of the money, but because of what he had trusted her with. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind outside the window was soft, and the house felt unusually quiet. She kept hearing his voice in her head. The calm way he used to talk, the kindness in his words, the stories he told her about patience and forgiveness. She understood now that every little thing he had said carried meaning she hadn't noticed before. When the sun rose the next morning, Lena made herself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the light fill the garden. She thought about what she should do next. She could easily live comfortably with what he had left, but that wasn't what he wanted. He had believed in her, and she didn't want to let him down. She took out a notebook and began writing down ideas. She listed things she could do: repair the local orphanage, help fund a few children's education, and maybe even open a small charity center in his name. The more she wrote, the more she realized that this wasn't just about fulfilling his wish. It was about finding herself again. The following days passed quietly. She met with his lawyer, who confirmed everything written in the letter. He told her that Mr. Howard had planned everything months in advance. He had even written in his will that Lena should receive guidance from a financial advisor he trusted. The lawyer smiled kindly at her and said, "He told me once that you'd surprise the world one day." Those words stayed in her heart. A week later, Lena visited the diner where she used to work. The same smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. The same customers sat at their usual tables. But this time she wasn't serving them, she was sitting among them. The owner came out from the kitchen and was shocked to see her. "You look different," he said, smiling. Lena smiled back. "I feel different." She didn't tell anyone about the money or who her husband really was. She didn't want fame or attention. All she wanted was to do what was right. Over the next few weeks, she began visiting local shelters and schools. She met people struggling just like she once had. She listened to their stories, shared meals with them, and slowly began helping in small ways, paying for supplies, food, and medicine. Each time she helped, she felt closer to the man who had believed in her. One evening, while walking home, she looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "You were right. Kindness is the only thing that lasts." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from peace. Months passed and Lena's life began to change quietly. She didn't buy fancy clothes or a big house. She stayed in the same small town and continued living simply. But everyone started noticing something different about her. There was a calm confidence in the way she spoke, a glow in her eyes that came from gratitude, not wealth. When people talked about her behind her back again, it wasn't out of jealousy anymore, it was out of admiration. They called her the girl who married the old man and found a purpose. One afternoon, while organizing papers in the study, Lena found one last sealed envelope at the bottom of a drawer. It was addressed to her in the same handwriting. Inside, there was only one line written on a small piece of paper. It said, "You passed the test." She laughed softly through her tears. He had been testing humanity, not her love, and she had shown him that goodness still existed. That night she lit a candle near his photograph, placed the letter beside it, and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." The flame flickered gently, and for a moment, she could almost feel his presence in the room. Lena knew then that her life's mission had just begun. The real gift wasn't the money or the properties. It was the trust he had given her, the faith and kindness she had restored. And as long as she lived, she would carry that lesson with her. Lena woke up early that morning to the sound of soft rain tapping against the window. The world outside looked calm, washed clean by the night storm. She sat up in bed and watched the drops slide down the glass, each one catching a glimmer of sunlight. It had been months since Mr. Howard had passed away, but his presence still lingered in every corner of the house. The study was still the same. She hadn't moved much around. It felt like a place frozen in time. Sometimes she would sit at his desk and talk to him as if he were still there. She'd tell him about the letters she received from the children she helped, the smiles she saw when she delivered food, or the way people had started treating her differently. She knew he couldn't answer, but in some way she always felt like he was listening. That morning, Lena decided it was time to start something bigger. She had done what she could in small ways, paying for school fees, helping neighbors, and sending supplies to families in need. But she wanted to build something that would last, something that would carry his name and his dream long after she was gone. She brewed herself a cup of tea and opened the notebook where she kept her ideas. On the first page, she wrote in bold letters, Howard Hope Foundation. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about continuing the kindness that had changed her life. She spent the following weeks meeting with people in the community, gathering volunteers and speaking with the same lawyer who had once helped her understand the inheritance. Slowly, the plan started taking shape. The foundation would focus on giving education and food to poor children and supporting widows who had no means to live with dignity. At first, some people didn't take her seriously. They thought she was just another person trying to show off her wealth. But Lena didn't argue. She had learned patience from Mr. Howard, and she knew that actions would always speak louder than words. The first building she chose for the foundation was the old diner, the same place where she had met him for the first time. The walls were cracked, the chairs were broken, and the paint was peeling. But to her, it was perfect. That place had changed her life, and she wanted it to become a place that would change others too. She bought the building and started the renovation. Day after day, she worked alongside the construction workers, helping paint, clean, and organize. She didn't sit back and give orders. She worked with her hands. People who passed by were surprised to see her covered in paint and dust, carrying boxes, or sweeping the floor. When one of the workers asked her why she didn't just hire more people, she smiled and said, "Because I want to build it with my own hands. He built his life that way, and now it's my turn." By the time the diner was ready, it didn't look like the old place anymore. It had turned into a warm, beautiful center with soft lights, wooden tables, and a small sign outside that read, "A place where kindness is served daily." Inside, she created a small free meal section for the poor, a reading corner for children, and a notice board for community help. She kept one particular booth the same, the one near the window where he used to sit. Every morning, she placed a hot cup of coffee there. She never drank it. It was her way of remembering him. The day of the foundation's opening, the whole town gathered. People who had once whispered behind her back now came forward to shake her hand. They spoke with respect and warmth. An old man from the neighborhood said, "You showed us that love and kindness don't have an age." You gave that man a reason to smile again. Lena smiled and replied softly, "He gave me one too." As the foundation grew, more people began joining her cause. Volunteers came from nearby towns, schools donated books, and local farmers brought food supplies. Children who had no shoes now came to the center every morning, laughing and learning. Some of them even started calling her Aunt Lena. Every night after closing, Lena would sit by the window with her cup of tea looking at the stars. Sometimes she imagined him sitting across from her, smiling with that same gentle look he used to have when he watched her talk about her dreams. There were times when she missed him deeply, especially on quiet nights when the house felt too big. But those moments no longer made her sad. Instead, they reminded her that love doesn't disappear. It simply changes form. He wasn't gone. He lived through everything she did. Months turned into a year. The foundation became a known name in the region. Reporters wanted to write about it, but Lena always refused to give interviews. "The story isn't about me," she would say. "It's about the people who still believe in kindness." One day, while sorting through old papers in the study, she found something she hadn't seen before. A small wooden box at the back of a shelf. Inside, it was a pocket watch, polished and shiny, and a folded note. The note said, "Time is the only thing we can't buy. Use it to make life better for others." She smiled and placed the watch on the desk. From that day on, she wore it every morning as a reminder that every moment counts. Lena's mother's health also began to improve over time, thanks to better medicine and care. She moved in with Lena, helping out at the center and telling stories to the children. Every evening, the small dining hall was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of freshly baked bread. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of love. One evening, as Lena was locking up, she noticed a young girl standing by the door. The girl looked thin and scared, holding a small bag. Lena walked up to her gently and asked if she was okay. The girl said she had run away from home because her stepfather was cruel, and she had nowhere to go. Without hesitation, Lena brought her inside, gave her food, and let her stay in the spare room upstairs. That night, while watching the girl eat, she felt a tear roll down her cheek. She whispered, "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" She knew he would have been proud. Days turned into weeks, and that young girl soon became one of the brightest students at the center. She told Lena that one day she wanted to help others the same way she had been helped. Lena smiled and said, "Then you'll make him proud too." As years went by, the town changed. New roads were built, businesses grew, and people often said it all started because of that little diner-turned-foundation. Lena never claimed credit for it. She always said it was the work of a man who believed in kindness and the woman who learned from him. On the anniversary of his passing, she held a small gathering at the center. Children, volunteers, and townsfolk filled the room. She stood in front of them, holding his photograph, and said, "He taught me that life isn't measured by how much you have, but by how much you give. We can't all be rich, but we can all be kind." Everyone clapped softly, and a few wiped their tears. After the event, Lena placed the photo back on the booth by the window beside the coffee cup. The steam rose gently, disappearing into the air, and for a second, she could almost see his smile in the reflection of the glass. That night, as the lights dimmed and silence filled the room, Lena sat there for a long time, thinking about how far she had come. The poor young girl who once worked at the diner had now become the one giving hope to others. She had gone from struggling for survival to building a legacy of compassion. Before going to bed, she walked outside and looked up at the night sky. The stars were bright and the air felt cool. She whispered softly, "You were right all along. Love doesn't fade, it grows." A calm peace washed over her as she smiled. She knew she had done what he wanted, but more importantly, she had done what felt right. From that day on, every morning began the same way. Lena would open the foundation, greet the children, and sit at that same booth with 2 cups of coffee. One for her, one for him. She would talk quietly about her plans, her worries, and her hopes, as if he were sitting right there. And in her heart, she knew he was. Because sometimes, the people who change our lives don't stay forever. They just plant something in us that keeps growing long after they're gone. Lena had found her purpose. And even though the world outside kept changing, her heart stayed the same, warm, kind, and full of gratitude. The girl who once thought her life was over had become a symbol of hope, and the man who once thought kindness was lost had left behind a story that proved it still existed.